You know how I do that thing where I get curious about where school is at with certain topics, and I learned from doing that about the topics being debated through essaywriter.com. Well, for some reason, I had this feeling of missing something that used to bring me excitement to learn about. And then I remembered I feel like I need to go back to my roots. I need to go back to learning about things that genuinely kept my attention and kept me fascinated. And that had to do with science. But what branch of science? And then I said, I really had a blast when I took AP Environmental Science. So then I thought, okay, let me go back to that. Where are we with the environment now? Because it's been a few years now. Maybe some things have changed. Maybe new problems have been added. Maybe problems have been resolved. And I just wonder where we're at with that because I miss those kinds of conversations. I just so happened to perform some kind of search. I forget exactly what I keyed in, but it was basically environmental problems. Maybe environmental problems of the present, something like that. And then I saved the link when I did that a few days ago, and I thought to myself, I'm just gonna read the subjects, the enumerated topics, and see how they make me feel. And then I thought, okay, this would make probably a good video so that I can show you guys how I used to think as a student about this type of thing. I'm going to leave the link in the description. I'm not necessarily going to read the description of everything, like the entire paragraph. I think that it would be better for me to just revolve around my own thoughts. And then you guys may learn a little bit about me when it comes to the sciences. This article comes from earth.org, which I honestly had never visited before. It was published on January the 3rd of this year, and it goes 15 biggest environmental problems of 2024. Back in my day, the problems that we had were mostly climate change. That's all we ever talked about, climate change. And because of the melting of the ice caps, then sea level will rise, and some coastal towns are really going to suffer from that and become underwater, and new towns that were far away from the coast might become the new coastline, something like that. And another one used to be the contamination of the oceans, like plastic making it to the oceans. And then the other one was the pollution of water streams, fresh water streams. And honestly, that's about it. That's about all I can remember from my time, so I'm eager. Global warming from fossil fuels. I think all of us, by this point, this is the one that introduced us to environmental issues. 2023 was the hottest year on record, with global temperatures at 1.46 Celsius above pre-industrial levels and 0.13 Celsius higher than the 11-month average for 2016. Currently the warmest calendar year on record. I do remember 2016 being particularly toasty, so I'm glad that they mentioned that. The year was marked by 6 record-breaking months and 2 record-breaking seasons. And I remember that. I remember seeing that all the time. Oh, records are going to be broken tomorrow for the forecast. And it is described as undoubtedly one of the biggest environmental problems of our lifetime. As greenhouse gas emissions blanket the earth, they trap the sun's heat, leading to global warming. And I remember in my class, there was a kid who asked, so why is it that if the sea level rises by like that much, something like that, that's a problem? And then my teacher had to explain to him what it actually means on a global scale, which is fine. I understood the concept. But to actually visualize it, I'm glad that the kid asked the question, because even though I understood it, for my teacher to break it down, it actually convinced me. Not that I needed convinced me, but it's like, okay, I see that threat. I see why it's real now. When it comes to the earth is getting warmer and fossil fuels burning, when I was younger, I always thought, well, I get it, fossil fuels are bad and whatnot. But I also thought, but what am I supposed to do about fossil fuels if I really don't have a choice about what I consume? Because what I grew up consuming revolved around fossil fuels. And by the time I become an adult, it's probably still going to revolve around fossil fuels. And now that I'm grown and I appear to have choices, I'm like, no, I still don't have choices. Because when you're a kid, all that you're being told is make sure that you don't waste, make sure that you don't drive unnecessarily, take the initiative to save energy. But honestly, there's a lot that I just cannot control. I'm not going to stop driving to start walking, possibly what would be a 2 hour walk to my job every single day. Now, if I had only like a 4 hour shift and it paid me hella well, sure, I can do that because it's just 4 hours to and from walking to my job. I wouldn't have to worry about doing my cardio at the gym. All I would have to do is lift. But what about the weather? I'm not going to be doing that walk whenever it's like 100 degrees outside. And I'm not going to be doing it when it's freezing rain or raining at all. You know, it's just not practical. Nobody ever, 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 this is the part that disappoints me, ever talked about cost. Because think about it. What have I said about electric cars? You're not going to find me in one of them unless it's free. And unless it is not the first generation of a particular model, because you never buy the first generation of anything. I want for the problems to be discovered, for the problems to be solved. And this is because I need stability. I need security. Some people can be out there, are able to afford the first model of every single gadget that comes out because they have a way to resolve those things. They have a way to supplement themselves when those things don't work for them, but I fucking don't. I have to be mindful of my resources. So in a sense, even if I wanted to participate in the effort of saving the environment, there's just some stuff that I just can't do at the moment. I understand the issue. I think this has to be a collective effort. Maybe we need to redesign our cities, which would lead to yet another bigger environmental problem. What happened to the days when we could walk everywhere? We could walk to one street, one downtown area. Everything that you needed was there. But now you gotta go to one place for some things, another place for another thing. And I'm glad that we have that choice, because maybe if you were to focus on just one market, you may be getting scammed whenever you buy meat. But if you drive farther out, you get a better deal for about the same quality. It's good that the consumer has options. But if I were trapped to one little community market, okay, I need to be able to compare what's happening elsewhere. So that would be my primary concern when it comes to fossil fuels. And I get it, they're harmful. I hate how CO2 emissions from car smells and how it leaves me feeling. It's definitely a carcinogenic thing. But again, if I were to sacrifice my vehicle, then what am I supposed to do? Because how is driving electric going to solve the problem? And on top of that, the time that is going to cost me to have an electric car, especially with the way that the charging for it works, something stupid. I'm just not willing to. Getting involved in a new transaction for a car after I busted my lady balls, getting my car paid off, I'm just not going through that. It's not necessary for me. When they talked about those things, like, well, they're gonna come out with electric cars and you should consider it, then I thought, okay, cool. But no one ever sat down and talked to you about, well, you may have a car already, you may be able to turn it in, but this may incur in you having a new insurance rate, a new car payment yet again. So in the end, when you originally paid 20 grand for a brand new car, now you may end up having to spend 30 grand, and one car experience is costing you $50,000. Because say if I paid off my 20 grand car and now I'm turning that one in to get into a $30,000 loan, I'm still only driving and owning one car, and it's costing me now more than double. See what I mean? That doesn't make sense to me. I made the investment for a car once and it's still perfectly functional. And until it just completely dies and disintegrates on me, I have no plans to upgrade. And I don't want to upgrade. Every time I drive another vehicle, especially newer ones, I am appalled by how computerized they are, just how much unnecessary interface it has. I just need a speedometer, gas monitor, temperature monitor, the transmission, parking brake, and a radio. That's it. I don't need no GPS. I don't need no monitoring of my car tire pressure. I don't need no weather announcements, nothing like that. My primary concern has always been how storms have been fueled by warmer oceans and how they feel more destructive and they've been more catastrophic, and that's been ruining people's lives, and certain areas are in a continuous building pursuit. Nobody deserves that. That's stressful. But again, how do we know for sure that we have a solution for CO2? Just because we stop emitting CO2s, does that mean that it just gradually cleans itself up? I think that during lockdown, I was able to perceive some of the environmental changes. I thought, wow, when people just stop being people in excess, then it feels like animals can live with less stress themselves. Poor governance. The climate crisis is a result of multiple market failures. To cut emissions quickly and effective enough, governments must not only massively increase funding for green innovation to bring down the costs of low carbon energy sources, but they also need to adopt a range of other policies that address each of the market failures. Organizations such as the UN are not fit to deal with the climate crisis. It was assembled to prevent another world war and is not fit for purpose. Members of the UN are not mandated to comply with any suggestions or recommendations made by the organization, which is the OECD, and it's a national carbon tax. Signing on to it is voluntary and there are no real repercussions for non-compliance. The issue of equity remains a contentious issue whereby developing countries are allowed to emit more in order to develop to the point where they can develop technologies to emit less, and it allows some countries such as China to exploit this. That was the hardest part for me in my environmental science class, and it was because our teacher, who was formerly a university professor, oh my god, he could really lecture. He used to go, all right, let's say that you're out there in an environmental science field kind of thing, kind of job. How do we resolve this? How do we fix this? And then we would all be like quiet. And he's like, what do you think we need to invent to make this better? Or what do you think needs to be done? And then some people finally started with ideas like maybe make it more expensive to travel. And then my teacher would go like, uh-huh. And other people would be like, all right, maybe consider building homes that are pretty much next to business areas. And then my teacher was like, uh-huh. Is there any potential problem that may emerge from that? And then I just so happened to very timidly, my teacher would kind of stand next to me because that's where his projector was. I just kind of quietly said, I don't want to live close to business centers. And then he was like, what was that, Zam? And I was like, oh, I was just clowning around. No, but go ahead and say it because that's actually a good point. Me not wanting to live close to a business is a good point. And he said, yeah, people have thought about some of these solutions that you guys are describing. But the problem is that there are people who are unwilling to partake because of the inconvenience that this incurs for them. So how do you fight that? And then I happened to say, I don't know if someone else said something before I said this, but I remember I said something like, even if you were to pay me an incentive, I cannot be bought. So even if you were to pay me to withstand the noise that business areas bring, and that's why I don't want to live close to them, you can't pay me to be interested in living in places like that. You can offer me $1 million. I'm not gonna take it. Because, you know, I think long term, not short term. The $1 million is a short term gratification, but long term, And even if you were to say, well, with the millions, you can move out to another place, I'm like, no, I already rooted and planted myself here. Why do I have to make the change so that other people are happier and are convenienced? No, I just remember that it led to some kind of back and forth. And then finally, I guess with classes like that, the hardest part is always beginning. It's always the initiation. But once the debate begins, that's when everybody wildens up. And then that's what my teacher said, see? And then that's when my teacher said something like, see, that is the point. That's why we need classes like this, seminars like this, debates like this. And this is what's supposed to happen when you go off to college. Personally, I thought about it. I remember back in the day when I tried writing journals, I told myself, as much as I like science and as much as I like to have a clean environment and world and beaches, of course, I don't have the education for this. I've never gone to college. I've never prepared myself for this type of thing. But I cannot imagine a life in which I can incorporate a policy that will take everybody into account. And it's not going to require someone to sacrifice something to gain something, or for someone to maybe lose everything so that someone else gains something. What does it look like? What does it look like to make a decision that just works for everybody? And as good a critical thinker as I am, at the time, I just couldn't. And now as an adult, presently, I still can't think about that. All I can think about is I like to not be disrupted. I like the flow of things currently, for me. But if you want my participation in something, which I don't think I'm that environmentally unfriendly anyway with my choices, then what am I supposed to do? The heater. I went years in which I would run the heat maybe a couple times per winter and endure the bitter cold because I legit was scared of the electric bill because I didn't have money. Did anybody acknowledge my sacrifice back then? No. Was I expecting somebody to acknowledge and celebrate my sacrifice because literally not having money forced me to? No. But now that I can afford to make myself a little bit more comfortable, I'm going to indulge. And that's why you hear the freaking unit right now. I don't have to suffer anymore. Food waste. This is my favorite considering that I work retail. A third of the food intended for human consumption, around 1.3 billion tons, is wasted or lost. This is enough to feed 3 billion people. Food waste and loss account for approximately 1/4 of greenhouse gas emissions annually. If it was a country, food waste could be the third largest emitter of greenhouse gases behind China and the US. Food waste and loss occurs at different stages in developing and developed countries. In developing countries, 40% of food waste occurs at the post-harvest and processing levels, while in developed countries, 40% of food waste occurs at the retail or consumer levels. And this is something that, as someone who works retail, I see and I feel, and it kills me, because it also depends on the policies of your company. Sometimes I get returns in which the customer just happened to change their mind after they walked out, and depending on what it is, we have to throw it out. Things that are like meat or dairy stuff, anything that required refrigeration, or basically something temperature sensitive, I can understand why those are things that you wouldn't want to redistribute around. But sometimes when the customer appears that they genuinely maintained it well, could we instead encourage them to be like, okay, I know you picked this chicken up, it turns out that you need to travel, and now you want to return it because by the time you are back, it's gonna go bad. What if I give you your money back, but at least the chicken can go to your neighbor? But again, I understand that nobody wants to get sued, nobody wants to take the risk. But sometimes I also think that maybe we should discourage people from doing that. Have a valid, genuine, legit reason for you to return something. If you're gonna travel, too bad. Lose your money, lose your product, and learn to plan things a little better. If it's an emergency, I understand you can't control those. But some people genuinely do not plan very well. They do that because they know that they can get their money back. But if you were to tell them, hey, you need to learn to organize yourself and make stuff like this count because it's going to cost you otherwise, people don't have a reason to be more mindful if you're not forcing them to be mindful. You're guaranteeing that they can get their money back. But if you start changing that, then maybe you can decrease the number of items that get returned. And sometimes I get people returning things because of something stupid, like, I didn't like it, it was too spicy, it was too salty. The only time I returned something in my life because it was too spicy, it was because I was brave and I decided to try ghost pepper chips. And I regretted it deeply. I mean, it was uncomfortable to eat, not enjoyable at all. And I said, I cannot believe I'm doing this, but for the first time ever in my life, I'm gonna have to return a bag of chips. But outside of that, me returning stuff, it's incredibly rare. And I do that too because I like to make choices that are educated. I like to stick to what I already know works for me. And if there's something I'm unfamiliar with, I would rather wait for someone to give me the opportunity to try it, as opposed to being like, I know I don't like tomatoes, but I'm gonna buy them anyway by a huge amount and decide that I'm going to have a nibble, not like it, and then return all of it. No, you try to be a little bit more astute. I know there's good stuff out there to be discovered, but you too have to do your part. I stick to the flavors I already know I like. Lime, lemon, peppery. I don't like honey stuff usually. Honey pepper, honey sesame things, those tend to be more boring than other choices like teriyaki maybe. Things like that. You should know your taste palette by now. Why the fuck are you making dumb choices? Another thing that incurs food waste is if you're buying a lot of things, just dumping things on your cart, and then suddenly something becomes really, really, really expensive, and you're like, I didn't know it was going to be that expensive. Try to understand how something is going to cost you, how you are going to be charged. You ever go to places in which your food is sold by the pound? You're just mindlessly adding and adding and adding things to the plate. And let's say that something is like $15 a pound or $17 a pound. Have the sensation of what a pound actually is. Adding and adding and adding and adding, and then suddenly, oh my god, I didn't know it was going to be this expensive. This expensive for this little bit? It's stupid. It's really stupid. And I also think that you need to be good at judging what you'll actually consume, because if you're a single home, why would you buy gallons of things? Especially things that are perishable. And if you have a tendency of not being at home very often to eat stuff from home, why would you buy in bulk? Seriously, biodiversity loss. The past 50 years have seen a rapid growth of human consumption, population, global trade, and urbanization, resulting in humanity using more of the Earth's resources than it can replenish naturally. Recent analysis has found that the sixth mass extinction of wildlife on Earth is accelerating. More than 500 species of land animals are on the brink of extinction and are likely to be lost within 20 years. The same number were lost over the whole of the last century. The scientists say that without the human destruction of nature, this rate of loss would have taken thousands of years. In Antarctica, climate change triggered melting of sea ice has taken a heavy toll on emperor penguins and could wipe out the entire populations by as early as 2100. I love emperor penguins. They look like they're standing so tall. That one always hurt me when I was in school, because there are species of animals that existed, but by the time I came about, they became extinct. I heard something about the bear in the California flag not even existing anymore. That was shocking for me. The way that older people describe their experiences swimming in the ocean or snorkeling. Some people would describe it as You know, I remember how colorful, how vivid, how rich it looked like to go snorkeling. You had so much to see, so much productivity going on. But now, 30 years later, you go to the same spot to do the snorkeling and it's just dead. Not a lot of vivid marine life activity. Everything looks grayer, darker, grimmer. And I believe that because I experienced a little bit of that. I remember going like, I'm surprised that I'm not seeing as much fish activity in this little spot as I expected. And then one of my parents or one of my grandparents, anyway, someone in my family told me decades ago this used to be thriving, but nowadays it's been kind of dead like this. That shit hurts. It's an experience I've been deprived of, and I never even had a chance to interact with those things. When it comes to being out and about, I'm really not wild about the forest like that, but I do feel like when I go outside, I don't hear animals like birds chirping and stuff quite as often as I used to as a kid. I feel like some spots have become quieter. And it makes sense because some places never even had houses built in there. And I remember trees that used to be in that area before they got cut down to make room for retail or stupid houses. I feel like people's ambition, at least around me, is I want to be alone and I want to have a lot. I want to be alone with a big house for some goddamn reason. Live within reasonable space. Be mindful of how much you own, how much trash you actually carry with you, and accommodate yourself accordingly. The person's arrogance is the most important thing here. It's like, nah, man, I'm having a great job. I'm getting paid super great. I'm busting my ass, getting paid for me to live mindfully in a tiny place. No, I want the big house. And then that fucking house spends most of the day empty. How does that make sense? I drive by this rich neighborhood on my way to work, and I am appalled by how pretty much all of them have their cars parked outdoors. They have a driveway for the car to be parked by the front door, pretty much. I don't see any garages in those homes. And those lots are always empty, but toward the evening or nighttime, that's when you actually see cars over there. And I'm like, oh, you finally get to occupy your stupid giant house. Congrats. And maybe on the weekend, you may indulge in it a little more, but stuff like that just never made sense to me. Nobody needs a 9-bedroom home unless your entire nuclear family and maybe a little bit of your extended family wants to stay there. But you want to have like 7,000 rooms and some of them are just for show. That is the waste. Imagine if all of us ambitioned for that type of thing. All of us ambitioned for that and we can actually afford to live like that. But, well, I don't want to share my backyard with another neighbor. Plastic pollution. In 1950, the world produced more than 2 million tons of plastic per year. By 2015, this annual production swelled to 419 million tons and exacerbating plastic waste in the environment. I'm not even gonna read very much on that one because I'm sure that we're all familiar with that. And now that I think about it, this was another issue that when I was in school was emphasized a lot. Try to not throw away plastic, try to recycle it, and paper too. Try to use a refillable water bottle and stuff like that. That one I used to do pretty well with. And to this day I still do. I try to refill my containers. Sometimes it's not possible. If I have to throw it away, at least I try to make a genuine effort to find a recycle bin before I have to resort to genuinely throwing it out. My apartment complex used to have recycling. Now they don't. I was trying to take it somewhere where they took recycling, but the problem was that the only place that was convenient for me to make it to, their bins were always overflowing. So it got to the point when sometimes I'm like, I'm producing more trash than what I'm able to dispose of. So I'm gonna have to, unfortunately, take those to a dumpster instead, because I'm not going to surround myself in my home with trash just because I don't have the option of recycling here anymore. I don't think it's fair that after I work fucking hard for almost 9 hours, I have to go around town hunting for a place that is ready to take my waste. And at least it takes me about a month to generate enough plastic waste to warrant a trip somewhere. But again, it's still inconvenient. You gotta make this easy for people. Plastic always disturbed me because I always thought about how that stuff seeps into food. And we know that plastic is not something that you can necessarily digest and break down. That will lead to all kinds of diseases, and they all sound painful. Deforestation. Every hour, forests the size of 300 football fields are cut down. By the year 2030, the planet might have only 10% of its forests. If deforestation isn't stopped, it could all be gone in less than 100 years. And see, when it comes to deforestation, that's the one that I was describing moments ago. I could actually observe and perceive with my own eyes. The highway, I remember a time when the highway was nothing but a wall of trees. But now, every time I venture out and I transit a highway that I hadn't used in a while, I am appalled by how I don't recognize any of the stuff that has been built there, and how a wall of trees may not be the most scenic thing in the world. It may be boring, but I need that redundancy. I can remember that even though by my time there was contamination issues, there was pollution issues, I remember that air being fresher in those areas. And now it's like the sound of traffic and the smell of the air being all carbony. That wasn't so bad back in my day, but now I can definitely perceive it. The thing that makes me sad about forests is that, I don't know about you guys, but when I was a kid, I didn't hear so much about flooding problems. But now I feel like every time there is a rainfall that lasts all day, we get flood warnings. And I don't know if you guys know this, but at least the way I was taught is that trees do a good job about retaining water. So if you get rid of trees, now there aren't any roots underground, or any ground for that matter, and now that rainwater has nowhere to go. So if you keep creating these concrete jungles, that water has nowhere to run off to. It doesn't get soaked underground like it used to when trees were around. And that leads to property damage and losses and loss of life. Air pollution. One of the biggest environmental problems today is outdoor air pollution. An estimated 4.2 to 7 million people die from air pollution worldwide every year, and that 9 out of 10 people breathe air that contains high levels of pollutants. I heard something about how even if you don't smoke ever in your life, even if you don't work in a mine ever in your life, you're still likely to get lung cancer. Causes of air pollution mostly comes from industrial sources and motor vehicles, as well as emissions from burning biomass and poor air quality due to dust storms. And the note of motor vehicle emissions, I can perceive it anytime I'm warming up my car, that I leave the front door open. My storm door, of course, has gaps that no matter how many tickets I put in, maintenance cannot fix. But I can smell the stupid exhaust blowing into my home because I back into my spot. Therefore, it's going to pretty much shoot toward my front door. But at the same time, I'm doing this because it's the winter months, and I want to keep the door open so that in case there's a clown out there considering doing something stupid while my car warms up, then at least they're maybe likely to be slightly deterred if they feel like they might be watched. Air pollution, I just genuinely remember a time when I could go out and I don't feel like, unless I was in a legit urban area, the air was cleaner. But now as I get older, I don't like to be outside a whole lot because now I have to think about what time of the day it is. If it's the daytime, I better forget about it. Especially the daytime on the weekends and Fridays. Holy shit, it's just terrible. But that's sad. It's air. It's not like I can be like, you know what, I'm going to choose to breathe a little less. And that way, the air pollution shouldn't hit me as bad, right? You can't. Melting ice caps and sea level rise. The climate crisis is warming the Arctic more than twice as fast as anywhere else on the planet. Today, sea levels are rising more than twice as quickly as they did for most of the 20th century as a result of increasing temperatures on Earth. Seas are now rising at an average of 3.2 millimeters per year globally, and they will continue to grow up to about 0.7 meters by the end of the century. In the Arctic, the Greenland ice sheet poses the greatest risk for sea levels because melting land ice is the main cause of rising sea levels. Another thing that I heard about this one is that those ice caps are supposed to be holding fresh water. They're supposed to be a freshwater source, so we're losing that. And fresh water is beginning to be a little bit difficult to come by, from what they say. In addition, it makes sense because, as far as I know, salt water is not supposed to freeze as easily. And even if it did, salt water is not really useful for us. Sea level rise will have a devastating impact on those living in coastal regions, like I mentioned earlier. And it's probably going to be people who probably don't do the most damage to the environment suffering those consequences. Now, in the US, coastal cities tend to be the places where rich people live or where rich people have a vacation home. So, in a sense, it's a little bit hard to feel empathy toward that if those homes tend to be empty anyway, or if those homes only serve as temporary places to live and it's just to make someone money. Like, I'll never feel bad. But that's the feeling I get, that it's going to be people who are already predisposed to hardship. They are the ones who are going to suffer the most from these disasters. Ocean acidification. Oh my God, this one definitely tore me up when I was in school. Global temperature rise has not only affected the surface, but it is the main cause of ocean acidification. And I remember when I learned about acid rain, I thought, what do you mean the rain? Because I always joke about how people run from rainwater. And I'm like, people act like rainwater is made of acid whenever it rains. Like, you see them all running toward their cars, covering their heads and stuff. And I wondered when people's fear for fresh rainwater came from. But now it makes sense because sometimes when it rains, if it's been a day when air pollution or air quality has been terrible, I actually feel like I can see some kind of soot being left behind by rain. Not very often. I can say I've seen that twice, and my car was clean, so it's not like I'm making this up. And I remember what a surface that's white looked like before the rain. Then I thought, damn, rain can really be acidic. I will never forget the picture on a textbook that I had in which it explained acid rain and then it showed vegetation without leaves. It only showed like tree barks. They lost their leaves. Our oceans absorb about 30% of carbon dioxide that is released into the Earth's atmosphere, as higher concentrations of carbon emissions are released thanks to human activities such as burning fossil fuels, as well as the effects of global climate change, such as increased rates of wildfires. So do the amount of carbon dioxide that is absorbed back into the sea. The smallest change in the pH scale can have a significant impact on the acidity of the ocean. I always think about the coral reefs when I hear that. Ocean acidification has devastating impacts on marine ecosystems and species, its food webs, and provoke irreversible changes in habitat quality. It makes me think of how when the temperatures get too warm, coral reef are really sensitive to that, so they end up bleaching. Once pH levels reach too low, marine ecosystems such as oysters, their shells and skeletons could even start to dissolve. Wow, I didn't know that. However, one of the biggest environmental problems from ocean acidification is coral bleaching. Oh, there it is. And subsequent coral reef loss. This is a phenomenon that occurs when rising ocean temperatures disrupt the symbiotic relationship between the reefs and algae that lives within it, driving away the algae and causing coral reef to lose their natural vibrant colors. And that reminds me, there are places I remember hearing about that suddenly started having a lot of algae problems. That little seaweed, that little grass that sometimes floats on coastlines, there are places that have been having a problem with that, where the entire shoreline is full of that little grass, and you even see it floating in the ocean water. But on top of that, you also see it on the bottom. And when you think about it, that grass may be preventing sunlight to hit the creatures that do need that sunlight. So, in a sense, you have two blankets of shades to deal with. It is estimated that coral reefs are at risk of being completely wiped by 2050. And of course, the plastic that is present in the oceans doesn't help the cause. Shit, that might be a third layer of acidity that the ocean has to deal with. Who does that? I mean, who looks at the ocean? Who looks at water and they think, you know what? I can just dump trash into it. Like, it'll be gone. I just don't want to carry my trash with me. I just want to, like, dump it into the ocean. How do you not imagine what that might do? I don't get it. Agriculture. Studies have shown that the global food system is responsible for up to 1/3 of all human-caused greenhouse gas emissions, of which 30% comes from livestock and fisheries. Crop production releases greenhouse gases such as nitrous oxide through the use of fertilizers. You know what's sad about agriculture? Even though as humans we're supposed to have a very diverse and varied diet, how many of us actually do that? How many of us actually consume pretty regularly fruits and veggies? And you're like, I eat enough apples, I eat enough oranges, I eat enough kale, enough lettuce, enough peppers for that stuff to never be wasted anyway. Because farmers, sure, they're gonna produce their stuff. But just because they're producing their stuff doesn't mean that they're producing just what people need. Some people may have a sudden lifestyle change and they're like, you know what, I'm going to consume more of these things because I'm going to, I don't know, experiment recipes. Or maybe some people might experience lifestyle changes in which they don't eat that kind of stuff anymore. So I think that with agriculture, it would be best if you signed up and committed to foods that you know you're going to use and not the market is offering this. For a week, I'll be in the mood to eat berries, but next week, I'm just gonna eat peas and carrots instead. No, like you be responsible as a consumer. Write your household name, your actual needs, how much of what you need, send it to the farmer, and then the farmer should try to produce things that are closer to what people actually want to buy and they know they buy. Because there's people I see where I work where they're consistently buying the same things. And then I thought, well, if this person is consistently buying this stuff, it is evident that they're consuming it. Why wouldn't you be able to pretty much order what you need harvested for your family, for your household? Food and water insecurity. Rising temperatures and unsustainable farming practices have resulted in increasing water and food insecurity. Topsoil is eroded every year faster than it can naturally be replenished. Laden with biocides and fertilizer, the soil ends up in waterways where it contaminates drinking water and protected areas downstream. I think out of all environmental problems, food and water insecurity was always the one that scared me the most. Can you imagine just innocently being out and about and you decide to just have a sip of something, a water from a stream, and then it's just bad for you? Exposed and lifeless soil is more vulnerable to wind and water erosion due to lack of root and mycelium systems that hold it together. A key contributor of soil erosion is overtilling. Only 3% of the world's water is fresh water. That number always disturbed me when I was in school because I always thought it is more likely that we're going to lose sources of potable water more than anything else, and that just frightened me because I really get freaked out by dirty water. I love water. I like to swim in it, I like to shower with it, I like to drink it, of course, and I like to cook with it. But the idea of losing that, losing clean water, I guess my cat lady comes out and I just freak out. I just cannot stand dirty water. Fast fashion and textile waste. Ooh, and let's not forget to mention, we use water for cleaning our homes too. Imagine if you had to use dirty water to attempt to clean your dirty home. Fast fashion and textile waste. The global demand for fashion and clothing has risen at an unprecedented rate that the fashion industry now accounts for 10% of global carbon emissions, becoming one of the biggest environmental problems of our time. This bothers me so much because nowadays, especially if you shop online, most of the time, unless it's a brand that you're familiar with and they have a commitment to quality, a lot of fashion is just trash. It's low quality, it's maybe usable maybe 4 times before it starts falling apart on you and having holes and pilling and pulls and snags and all that. And I'm the kind of person who, unless my clothes have like a giant, impossible to conceal hole, I will continue to use it. The one thing that I have to regularly replace are socks, and you guys saw it. Outside of that, once I buy something, I try to sell it. I don't just throw it away. And the things that I sell are things that simply don't fit me anymore. And if it's something that fits me, it's one of those things that you bought, you used maybe a couple times, but then the event needed for you to wear it again or consider wearing it again is over. I would rather have it posted so maybe someone can give it a new opportunity than it living here or me possibly just discarding it mindlessly. But I hate that. The fast fashion industry, I just hate it. It's stupid. It's because people want to try to have a new outfit every day. It's so stupid. You don't need that. You guys have seen me. There are some things that I got like 7 years ago that to this day I still wear. Maybe that's one of the positive things about maintaining yourself predictable and simple. Don't have sudden extreme changes, and that way you're not forced to buy different clothes. Like, I have always been a size small or medium, and because I don't get extraordinarily big, I don't need to be changing my wardrobe to account for that. Oh my god, my pants no longer fit me. I have to buy large or extra large. And that is important. People don't realize how changes in your physical state can have costs in ways that you're not considering. So it's nice that everything that I have been able to fit into, regardless of size. And it is extremely rare that I have to discard something because it's physically not possible for me to use it. Overfishing. Over 3 billion people around the world rely on fish as their primary source of protein. About 12% of the world relies on fisheries in some form of or another, with 90% of these being small-scale fishermen. Think a small crew in a boat, not a ship, using small nets or even rods and reels and lures not too different from the kind you probably use. Of the 18.9 million fishermen in the world, 90% of them fall under the latter category. And see, when it comes to fisheries, that's the kind of thing that I wish I were better with. I wish I was better about consuming seafood, but salmon is about the only thing I ever mess with. Yeah, I do think about places that rely on fish as their source of protein, and if you ask me, they tend to be the healthiest ones too. Fish has so many good nutrients and oils that it's so lean and good for you. Cobalt mining. But cobalt is such a pretty color! Cobalt is quickly becoming the defining example of the mineral conundrum at the heart of the renewable energy transition. As a key component of battery materials that power electric vehicles, cobalt is facing a sustained surge in demand as decarbonization effects progresses. Cobalt mining is associated with dangerous workers' exploitation and other serious environmental and social issues. The environmental costs are also substantial. In mining regions, scientists have made note of high radioactivity levels. Dust from pulverized rock is known to cause breathing problems for local communities as well. When it comes to electric vehicles, at least with fossil fuel ones, we knew what problems to expect, but now with the EV transition, we are creating new problems. So now we still have the problem of fossil fuel burning vehicles, and now we have the created problem of electric vehicles production that was trying to resolve this problem, but now it created a new problem or exacerbated a problem. Soil degradation. Organic matter is a crucial component of soil as it allows it to absorb carbon from the atmosphere. Plants absorb CO2 from the air naturally and effectively through photosynthesis, and part of this carbon is stored in the soil as soil organic carbon. Healthy soil has a minimum of 3 to 6% organic matter. However, almost everywhere in the world, the content is much lower than that. If we do not change our reckless practices and step up to preserve soil health, food security for billions of people around the world will be irreversibly compromised. With an estimated 40% less food expected to be produced in 20 years' time, despite the world's population projected to reach 9.3 billion people. When I was in school, I remember hearing something about when the world hits, I forget if it was 7 billion or 8 billion, then we're truly going to have a problem, an environmental problem on our hands. Not that I needed anything to reinforce the fact that I don't want kids or to convince me. That made it even more clear that okay, I cannot stop driving the motor vehicle, but I can stop ever having kids. That'll be my contribution to the planet. We're not running out of people, so you don't need me to produce people. I hope you found this interesting. I'm always interested in these kinds of topics, but I just don't explore them quite as often. Since I'm not in school anymore, it's easy for it to fall off the radar for me. But every once in a while, I like to indulge because I remember spending, especially spring and summer evenings, just reading and reading and reading science books, and I just felt full of life. Mostly the science books I would read, some of them were space related, but most of them were meteorology related. And eventually when I had a computer, that's when I started doing most of my reading online as opposed to with books. I just loved having a textbook that I could borrow from school for the summer, and I could read it from start to finish. Best way to spend my time. So I guess I fatigued myself doing that to the point that I didn't care to read books outside of that anymore. I can read science books, but other books in general, I just can't. Not interested. Alright, I'll see you soon. Thanks for watching.